So just a little talk on the title of tonight's program, Reverse Colors. This refers to a musician's uniform in the Euro-American Army back in the old days, okay? For a tremendous length of time in our history, the American military uniform was blue, all right, blue with red trim. And musicians are going to wear the reverse of that, or the inversion of that. So a red coat with blue trim in order to make them stand out and be easily found by officers when necessary. So if you're beholding the slide here, the image on the right, the red coat, should be very familiar to anyone that's familiar with Fort Meigs, as this is in our museum collection. This is a militia coatee from the War of 1812, and it is a musician's coat. I've shown this to a lot of my music history colleagues, and they are absolutely fascinated by this. This is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, musician's coat that we know of, so we're very proud to have that. But you can see that it is a red coat, and it is trimmed with blue. That it would be a typical reverse color from the early 19th century. And on the right side of the screen, this is a modern picture of the modern U.S. Army band, this clarinet player. And you can see on the hat, there is a bright red slash there. That is to harken back to the old days of the military uniform, that bright red color, remembering the days of reverse colors and the red coat that American musicians wore. So it's very, very cool that in the modern military, we have that represented. If you also look at his coat, he's got the rank insignia on his sleeve or his shoulder there is kind of inverted from what we're used to seeing, all right? That is sort of a modern adaptation. The specialists in the Army are going to wear that inversion. That's the modern day realization of the idea of reverse colors. So very, very cool to see that, both the color and the signal. Reverse colors. All right. So what are we going to talk about tonight? Well, we're going to focus primarily on the American Revolution and on the War of 1812. Why? Well, because this is sort of the golden age of music in the Army from the early days of the period, all right? Fort Meigs, of course, is in the War of 1812 site, and the War of 1812 needs additional airtime anyway for all of us in history. So we're going to be focusing on that. We're going to be looking at the two branches of military music, field music, and then the regimental bands. They have very different jobs, very different music. So we're going to be exploring that. We will, of course, be touching on the rest of the 19th century and even in the 20th century tonight as well. But all along the way, we're going to be looking a little bit at the music that's important in all those different time periods. Some of the particular pieces that were popular for the musicians in the band, music that was important for Americans throughout history. So we'll be examining that and other musician duties as well. They do a lot more than just play music. They have specific assignments in different ages. We'll be examining that. And then the myths as well, some popular or common myths surrounding musicians and military music. But back to the very first point there, talking about the golden age of American field music. If you think about what we do out here at Fort Meigs, we are interpreting history. And one of the ways that we have to do is get people to really be exposed to maybe how different times could be back then as compared to today, how different people's lives are. And sometimes that really strikes a chord with them and makes them realize the immensity of history. And if you think about the American Revolution, the War of 1812, even the Civil War, all of these conflicts are taking place at a time before recorded music. Now that's really significant because if you ever heard music in your life, that means that there is a real live musician playing somewhere within your earshot, okay? So that makes it a very special, a very rare thing sometimes, okay? Think about our lives today. Music is everywhere, okay? You get in the car, you're driving, the radio is playing. You're in the grocery store, there's sound being pumped in through a system. You're exercising, you have earbuds in, all right? So music surrounds us all the time. And it doesn't strike us how special it is to people from 200 years ago. And if you lived in an isolated community at this time, you know, way out on the frontier or on a farm, you might only hear music a couple of times in your life, okay? Hopefully, the church choir is singing on Sunday. Maybe there was a fiddler hired for the wedding dance, but it might only be a couple of opportunities that you get to hear actual music. All right, so music in the American Revolution and the early 19th century is going to be really, really important, really special. And the Army is going to use that to its advantage. Going back to the roots of our story, we do know that music was used on the battlefields of ancient China. In particular, drums were used. We don't know if they were used beyond sort of the psychological or the terror effect, but we do know that the drums were given to the soldiers that were the most fearless, the most ferocious warriors on the battlefield. So this is a lot different than the little band geeks that are standing behind the firing line that we might think of as musicians. They were the most ferocious. Why? Because they were going into combat essentially unarmed with nothing but their bodies and their instruments, all right? So they had to be fearless and ferocious, guys that could eat their opponents versus shooting at them, right? And this use of music on the battlefield is going to spread across Central Asia. We do know that it's used in the Middle East during the Crusades. All right, Saladin and his armies and the other Islamic armies that are fighting there are using music, drums, yes, all kinds of percussion, noise-making equipment, and horns and things like that. They're using it to rally troops together, to coordinate attacks, and to inspire fear in their opponents. And the European field commanders are going to recognize its use, and they're going to take that knowledge, that inspiration, back to Europe when they go, along with a lot of other important ideas that affect the Western world at this time. All right, and music is going to be one of them. So we can see on the battlefields of Britain by the 14th century that music, again, drums are being used. All right, the great wars between England and Scotland that are being waged at this time, drums will be on the battlefield in a rudimentary form. And so this is the birth of it, and it's going to evolve through the English Army into the British Army during Britain's age of empire, the 18th and the 19th century, okay, where it will kind of come to its zenith. But our story begins with this man on the left of your screen, and 3 gold stars to anyone who can identify this individual. You get a brevet promotion to Major General, because this is not the most well-known likeness of this person. Any guesses? I'm going to grab the lights while we are contemplating who this might be.
Mr. Frank? Benjamin Franklin.
All good guesses. The painter was very generous in not putting more heft on this individual. But this is none other than William Augustus, the Duke of Cumberland. And I'm sure that was on the tip of everyone's tongue, absolutely. William Augustus, he's known as Butcher Cumberland or Butcher Billy. If you are of Scottish descent, you might know it by that name. The Duke of Cumberland is going to be the second son of King George II. And as the younger son, he is the head of the British Armed Forces. And in that capacity, he's going to spend most of his time fighting on the European mainland, all right? The wars of the Austrian succession, if you know your Euro history, okay? So while on the mainland, and fighting these battles, he's going to encounter Swiss troops who are using an instrument called a fife, and he really likes it. He thinks it's an excellent combination, the way the Swiss are using it, the fife with the drum. He likes it so much, he recognizes its effectiveness, and he's going to demand that this be incorporated into the British Army. So the orders will officially go out for a fife and drum combination in 1747. We talk about it being a unique, an outdoor, and a balanced sound. The Duke of Cumberland was quite correct in that, okay? The fife is a member of the flute family. This is just a simple wooden pipe, 6 finger holes and 1 blowhole. So it is extremely high-pitched, it is extremely shrill, it is extremely loud, and therefore it's very, very good for outdoor use. And that balances well with the field drums of the time, and this is an example of a rope tension field drum. It has this sort of deep shell. It is a snare drum. It does have snares on the bottom for that kind of crisp military sound. But with this long shell that it has, it's going to create a deeper, boomier sound, and that lower pitch is going to travel further across a battlefield. The drums are going to provide all of the rhythms and the cadences that can be used for soldiers to march to coordinate their efforts, and that driving, pulsating rhythm to inspire troops and to generate fear in the opponent. So all of the rhythms are coming from the drum. But a fife is going to give you the ability to have tunes, okay, to play melodies. And tunes can be recognized a little bit easier, perhaps, by human beings than simply a drum beat, okay? And the fife is going to be soaring over the sound, high up over the sound of human activity. And these lower pitched field drums are going to be thundering underneath the sound of human activity. So it is a balanced sound musically in terms of rhythm coming from the drums and melody, with tunes coming from the fife, and the lows coming from the drums and the highs coming from the fife. So Butcher Cumberland was very correct in pairing these two together. I do want to mention the French and Indian War here, because this is kind of the first time all of the colonies are sort of going all in on military production. The legislative governments, troops that are raised, and the soldiers that are serving in those continental militias are going to be the soldiers that they're going to be the soldiers that go on to establish the core of the American Army during the Revolution. All right. So the music that they are hearing, the way that music is incorporated in the Army, they're going to be learning all of that in the French and Indian War and take what they know with them to establish the American Army. And I do just want to mention the Scottish regiments for a minute, because during the French and Indian War, and particularly in its aftermath, Pontiac's Rebellion, we have 4 full Scottish regiments on the ground in North America, okay? They're not going to be using the fife and drum, they're going to be using the bagpipes and drum, the pipe and drum. But this is rather significant to me, or at least interesting to me, because the bulk of the American songbook for the American Revolution and the War of 1812 and even beyond, the bulk of the American songbook will be Scottish music, okay? It's not going to be English music, French or Spanish or even Dutch music. It's going to be Scottish music. And we're trying to figure out why that is exactly. I even had some graduate students kind of exploring this idea with me. Was it because of the Scottish presence during the French and Indian War, when everyone was learning their trade? That's one theory. There are a couple more that we can explore throughout the night. So on to the American Revolution. And we have some nice images here of Boston, sunny Boston, to represent the start of the war. There will be some differences between how the American Army organizes their music and how the British Army organizes their music, okay? In the Continental Army, you're going to have 1 drummer and 1 fifer per company, all right? So 2 musicians out there with the troops, maybe 60 or 70 guys on the field. The British, however, are going to use drums for each of the company, but only 2 fifers per regiment. All right, so there are going to be more fifers really in the American Army than there will be in the British Army. All right, so a little bit different in the organization. American musicians are going to be recruited specifically for that purpose. Okay, they're going to be, the recruiting sergeant is going to come to you and you play the drum. How would you like to join the Army as a drummer? All right, they're going to be recruited specifically as musicians to have no other duties than that purpose. And American Continental recruiters are going to be looking for them to help with the war effort. 1775, I did want to mention that, Lexington and Concord, just to illustrate that music is with the American Army from the absolute very beginning. Okay, it's inception, the moment of birth there on Lexington Green. John Diamond was the Massachusetts militiaman, drummer who played two arms on Lexington Green to pull the Minutemen out of the taverns, to get them out of their homes and get them assembled on the field as the British were about a third of a mile away or so. All right. Two arms. And the version of two arms that John Diamond played that morning is the same that we play out here at Fort Meigs. It's the same in the War of 1812. It's kind of not a very inspiring sound, I don't think, but you guys can hear that through the computer speakers. That is two arms. Later that same afternoon at Concord Bridge, we do know that the fife and drum are going to be playing there across the water. As the British are approaching, they are playing the song, The White Cockade. We specifically know that. That, again, is a Scottish tune that they are playing, The White Cockade. And it's interesting that they choose that song, and this is another theory about Scottish music. The White Cockade is specifically a Jacobite song, okay? And the Jacobite rebellion of the 1740s was really the last great significant rebellion against the British Empire. And it's almost like they're hearkening back to that idea, maybe thumbing their nose at the British, saying that we're embracing the music of your past enemies, okay? It's almost like a musical announcement that we are in rebellion. And that's really kind of cool, okay? So again, is the Scottish influence coming from the fact that we have regiments on the ground in the War of 1812? Or is this a little bit deeper? Are they trying to pull up tunes of Britain's enemies in their music? Other important songs during this era, Chester, an old tune by William Billings, very popular at the time, and Yankee Doodle is going to be quite a significant song, and it still is today. Yankee Doodle was a big one for the American Revolution. These are the two major divisions of music in the Army. And this was our second point on our outline for tonight. Field music and the regimental band. So field music is what we've been talking about pretty much so far, the fife and the drum. These are the musicians that are out in the field, on guard mountings, on the battlefields with the troops and maneuvering around with them. All right. They are going to be used to help train soldiers. The marching, getting everyone to play in step. This is easier to do when you have music playing, when you have a rhythm to sync to, okay? But it's not just marching and maneuvering. It's also the manual of arms, where you move the musket, okay? All of this has to be fast and snappy and done in a uniform manner. So the musicians, each of the different commands for the manual of arms has a corresponding drum beat. How many steps is that motion? So all the soldiers are doing it in unison and they get used to that uniform speed. All right, so the field music is going to be used to help train the army. And the real big one for field music is long distance communication. And I am honestly really starting to change the way I think about this aspect of music from when I first started out here. All right, I think we have this idea that battlefields are really loud places. We have guns going off, cannons going off, horses screaming, men shouting. That's very difficult to hear. And the orders need to be given through the drums in order that it be understood by everyone. But I'm really starting to think that musicians are used more like conduits for communication all the time. Yes, the musicians are sending signals, but they're also receiving signals. And this could be basically all the time. You are sending and receiving information, okay, as a conduit. The Army at the time, they are using a musical language to communicate over a very long distance. And like any foreign language, you need a translator to translate that information into words that people can understand. And that's what the musicians are actually doing. All right. Officers need to know what's going on elsewhere on the battlefield. They're hearing sounds from other parts of the battlefield, and the musicians are translating those signals into information for the officers to understand what they can do. And that's the real important part about the reverse colors, about the red coat. It's not that an officer has to give an order, where are my musicians? I need to give an order. No, it's he needs to understand what's going on somewhere. And he hears something and he needs to find out what's going on. He needs to find a musician quickly and ask the drum major or a field musician, what is that called? What is happening? Okay. So this conduit, this translator of a different language is really what a musician is. And I just have two short stories to tell you to illustrate this point. All right. Let's say you have an entire regiment on the march. They're moving between towns. Okay. They're marching down the road in open column. Okay. That means that you have a company of soldiers, and then a small gap, and then the next company of small soldiers and a small gap, and on the train goes. You're going to have artillery somewhere, the baggage wagons coming. This is stretched out for a very long time. Well, let's say a halt is called at the front of the column. The drummer in the leading company is going to start playing the halt. Okay, the drummer in the second company is going to hear that. They're also going to start playing the halt. The drummer in the third company is going to hear that and also start playing the halt. And backwards through the line goes the signal. But it's not just about playing the halt. The drummer is going to be expected to fall out of line, find a superior officer, and say, Lieutenant, that is the halt, sir. Okay? So the rank and file certainly are not going to be recognizing music. And it's not even the officers who would be expected to recognize it. They may, but they're not expected to. It is the drummer who has to communicate that signal to his superior officer. Okay. And on a battlefield situation, if we have a huge battle where we have multiple battalions on both sides engaged, okay, battalion commanders have to know what's going on in the battlefield. They have to be able to have information on where troops are, what is happening. Okay. Once the firing starts and smoke enters the battlefield, they're going to lose that visual picture, but they need to use their mind's eye, their imagination, to continue seeing the battlefield and what is happening. The musicians are going to be really crucial in that. Okay. So if the battalion beside us is really having a time and they're inflicting great damage on the British, they need to press their advantage. They need to fix bayonets and move across the field. Okay. The commanding general a half mile away needs to know that. The battalion commanders beside you need to know that so they can maintain this picture in their minds. Okay. So they're going to advance. Our battalion commander is going to hear something. He's going to grab the drum major. What is happening over there? The drum major is going to listen for a second. They are advancing, sir. Well, how far are they advancing? 64 paces, sir. Okay. Because the drum major is going to hear the advanced march. Maybe it's played 4 times in a row on a loop. All right. He knows that 64 steps for the men, and he can communicate that to his commanding officer. Now they're moving at the left oblique. How far? 28 paces, sir. Okay. So now he can tell where other units are on the battlefield just based on the music. All right. But you need a specialist there to communicate with you. And that's really what the field music is doing in terms of long distance communication. And there's a lot of stories, a lot of primary sources to hear, to collect these different stories, and you really can get a clearer picture of what the field music does. The regimental bands are going to be based on a European model known as Harmonie Musik. This is specifically a German model. The German states had very good bands, and everyone in the world wanted to emulate the German bands. The Harmonie Musik is about 6 to 8 players in the early days, so kind of a small band. But they will expand the instrumental colors of the Army music. Okay, so not fifes and drums, but we're going to get into the different instruments that get mixed into the regimental bands in a little bit. The regimental band can be under the command of the drum major, or specifically a bandmaster appointed to them. Yeah. So with the revolution here, couple of key individuals, part of the story. John Highwell is a fifer in the 3rd Continental Artillery. In fact, he's the fife major. And in 1778, he's going to be appointed to the inspector and superintendent general of all the Army's music. And he's going to do some very important things to establish music in the Army. Specifically, he establishes uniformity in tunes. Okay, so if your regiment is playing the advance march, it better be the same as my regiment's advance march. Otherwise, I have no idea what you're doing. Okay, if you're going to be, playing to arms, it better be the same as what we're doing. So everybody in the Army knows the different signals. Okay, so we need a uniformity of tunes. He established standard rehearsal times, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Okay, you don't think about this kind of minutia or why it's important, but in an Army camp, if suddenly you hear drumming or music playing, you might be wondering what's going on. Okay, are we under attack? Are we supposed to march to New Jersey? What's happening? Well, they're just practicing. Okay, so if you establish standard rehearsal times, people better realize that there's not going to be something militarily going on or that needs to be done. Okay, there will be no practicing outside of those hours. All right, so there's no individual practicing in your tent or out in the woods somewhere. You practice during the Army standard rehearsal times. No drumming on Sundays or during court martials. Okay, we don't want to hear all that racket if we're trying to try a man for a capital offense, right? If we're trying to hang somebody, let's not be banging on the drum. Okay, and he enforced disciplinary measures to increase good relations between musicians and the regular soldiers. Remember, musicians are recruited specifically for that purpose. All right, which means they're not walking a sentinel's duty, and that can make other soldiers mad if they're not sharing in the workload. But he did a lot to repair measures between musicians and soldiers. And then the other big individual is von Steuben. Very important for the American Revolution, very important for Army music. He's going to establish exactly which beats and which signals the Army is going to use. Okay, what they're going to be used for and when. All right, so you can see that list there that he established, which will be in play for many, many years hereafter. The regimental bands. As we said, this is based on the European model of harmony musique. 6 to 8 players. It might be 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, and 2 horns. The oboes and the bassoons are known as the hautbois. This is a kind of a European term, these double-reeded instruments. And if you're thinking to yourself that a bassoon is not a great outdoor military instrument, that would be my first reaction too. But these hautbois, the older versions of these, are going to be quite loud and quite impressive. Okay, if you think about an oboe reed today, it's this tiny little delicate double reed thing that you have to protect so carefully. But back then, those hautbois reeds were almost like putting 2 bass clarinet reeds on an oboe. They're huge, they're honky, and they're loud. Okay. The horns are going to be natural horns. These are the forerunners to our modern French horn. And then if you don't have oboes, you might have a brand new instrument at this time, a clarinet, which is showing up all over Europe and on American battlefields as well, the clarinet. The regimental band is going to be used for the formal ceremonies, for parades, for recruitment. Again, recruitment. Remember how rare music is at this time. So if you've got a bunch of musicians playing in town, you're like, hey, I'm going to go check that out. All right, you want to go hear the music. So you have a well-established crowd already. Then the recruiting officer can get up on the soapbox and start talking about the importance of joining the Army. All right, so the band's going to be used a lot for recruitment. Entertainment and morale. Got to keep the troops happy. Going to play concerts for the troops. All right, again, how rare, how special is music? So this is a rare treat. Going to hear some music, keep the men happy. And then visiting dignitaries, foreign dignitaries, and ladies, officers' wives come. We have to give them a special show, a special welcome. We're going to have the regimental band come and play. The Janissary craze is in mega vogue right now. Basically, that means that Turkish music, anything Turkish is going to be kind of a trend at this time. And that means Turkish music is going to be a trend. All right, if you've ever seen the movie Amadeus, all right, the Mozart story from the mid-'80s, Tom Hulce, and the ladies are sitting in the hair salon together, and they're like, give me something Turkish. I want a Turkish hair. I hear everything is going to be Turkish this year. All right. And Mozart is writing the Abduction from the Saragla, a very famous opera set in a Turkish harem, right? So this Janissary craze is going on. That's going to add special additional percussion, like bass drums, tambourines, cymbals, okay? And it's strange to think this is just a trend in the late 18th century, but if you think about a modern marching band, the two instruments that first come to mind, at least in my mind, the most iconic instruments of marching band, is the big old bass drum and a pair of marching crash cymbals, right? That is the modern band. It all comes from this time, the Janissary craze. The regimental bands are not going to be official military units, okay? They are going to be basically professional musicians who are hired as the private servants of officers, all right? Colonels or a pool of officers, okay? They're going to be uniformed and paid by those officers, all right? That means that they can't be given orders, and that's going to be an important thing, a sticking point, all right? If you say, all right, let's get the band off the field, let's do a right about wheel, and we'll march off the parade. And the bassoon player is looking around like, what's a right about wheel? I don't know. I don't care. I'm a bassoonist, right? And this is going to create huge problems for the Army, these unofficial bands, all right? Next slide. The Army, still talking about the Revolution here, the Army is going to go under heavy reorganization after Yorktown, okay? If you recall, you know, the war doesn't technically end until 1783, but we need an army in the field until that time to represent that we are still, you know, a nation. So what to do in all this downtime? It's a good time to clean house and reorganize the Army. So Washington's Army going to have 8 line companies, 1 light company, a staff, and a headquarters. And all of those are going to need musicians, okay? Staff musicians in the list above are largely going to be used as recruiting. So they're going to be gone. And this means that the musicians are going to be assigned to their duties by the drum major, but they're probably going to be rotating around constantly. If you need musicians at headquarters, that's a 24-hour position, all right? So we're going to have to work in shifts. So we're rotating the musicians in and out, and if the staff musicians are gone on recruiting duty, they're going to need musicians 24 hours a day. So we're cycling through musicians. That means that musicians probably aren't going to be serving with the same units all the time, okay? So if you're with a company on one day in the field, you might not be with those same guys the next day because we're moving musicians around a lot. These are specialists in the Army, and so they're very, very separate. Artillery regiments do have drum and fife majors, but they don't have the staff musicians. And here's a key point post Yorktown, 1782. Musicians are going to be drawn from the ranks, meaning no longer are musicians recruited specifically for that purpose. Okay, they're going to be soldiers first and then made into musicians. Okay, so every captain is going to be responsible for getting 2 field musicians out of his company and 1 or 2 men to send to the regimental band. Okay, so no more are we going to have these unofficial regimental bands. They are going to be soldiers. And there's an interesting story as to why. The problems of not being able to give musicians orders. The winter of 1779, George Washington is going to be meeting with some big-time French dignitaries, okay? The gig is in February, all right, 1780. He starts looking for a regimental band to play this gig in November of the previous year, 4 months in advance, okay? Big-time dignitaries. Well, who's got the best band in the Army? Well, Colonel Webb's got the best band. All right, let's get Colonel Webb's band up here. Well, Colonel Webb's going to say, yeah, but you can't order these guys to come to your headquarters and play this gig. And these are my personal staff, my personal servants, okay? I could loan them to you as a friend, but you know what, George? We are not that close of buddies, so no, okay? But Colonel Webb, he brings up an excellent point. He's like, we're in winter quarters now. My camp is 15 miles from your headquarters. How are you going to get the musicians from my base to yours? How are you going to get their instruments this way? Okay. Once they're in your town, where are you going to house them? Okay. You need to set up quarters for these guys. Who's going to pay for that room to be rented or rooms? Okay. You're going to need to feed these guys because these are my responsibility. I was feeding them here. You're going to have to give them meals. They're not drawing meals from the army. Okay. So how are you going to feed them? You're going to have to hire a conductor to rehearse them. And who's going to pay for all that rehearsal time? You want all this fancy, fluffy French music to be played for these dignitaries. Who's going to rehearse this band and who's going to pay for the rehearsal time? They are professional musicians and they demand a high price. Okay. So you see in the winter of 1779, Washington actually scrambling around trying to free up public money to pay for a band to play for these visiting dignitaries. And he can't do it. He's asking for other bands, same problems, right? So no more are bands going to be unofficial, all right? These are going to be soldiers. They're going to draw public money the way the Army does. They're going to draw rations the way the Army does, and they're going to be able to follow orders, okay? So no more unofficial bands. And two more important points before we move on. John Highwell, if you look at his paperwork towards the end of the war, he is making massive demands for blank staff paper. You know, staff paper, the 5 lines that musicians read music from, melody and pitch, or pitch and rhythm. That means that musicians are learning their trade by reading and writing the music. And that's kind of a profound thing to know and learn, all right? Because we kind of always assumed that this was done sort of by rote. The drum major plays something over and over and over again, and you learn how to do it by doing it again and again and again and again. That's actually not the case. They are reading and writing, and we still have examples of music written by soldiers, field musicians from the American Revolution. And desertion rates among musicians are extremely low in the Army. These guys are not going home. Okay? We can't end our talk on the American Revolution without looking at Yankee Doodle a little bit. Because Yankee Doodle is an extremely important song for Americans in the American Army. It's sort of an unofficial national song at this time and beyond. But we really don't know where it comes from. There's a lot of great stories about where Yankee Doodle comes from, but we can't substantiate any of that. We do know that its first appearance in writing is 1767, the opera The Disappointment, which is a domestically produced opera, which is fascinating. So this is written in the colonies, okay? It'd be great to see a living history group do a performance of The Disappointment sometime. But that comes up in the libretto. And its first publication will be in 1775, which is kind of interesting. The year that the revolution begins, Yankee Doodle is going to receive its first actual musical publication. Where? In Scotland. And there is that weird Scottish colonial connection to us. But as far as the origins go, you know, we had a musicologist, an American musicologist in the 1820s who really wanted to set out and find the origins of Yankee Doodle, because there was like 7 different countries in Europe that claimed that in their folk traditions they had Yankee Doodle, and that was the origin of Yankee Doodle. So he went to explore these, and he traveled around Europe and he listened to all this music and actually wrote down what he was hearing. And it's amazing to look at those notes, because the music that other countries were claiming was the origin of Yankee Doodle, some of it is not even close. I mean, there's nothing of Yankee Doodle music at all. And so he came home basically saying that there is no known origin. The best known story about it is that it's actually written by the British during the French and Indian War. And it was written as a song to mock the colonial militia. Okay? And it was played in this dilapidatory, derogatory manner, all right, to basically make fun of the colonial militia. The Yankee is obviously a New Englander, and the Doodle is a do-nothing, because the colonial militia couldn't accomplish anything. They were all a bunch of do-nothings that were useless in camp and on the battlefield. But in that very American kind of way, the colonial militia is going to adopt that song that was used to mock them, make it their own, and make it a source of pride. And that's a very American idea. So Yankee Doodle, if that's the origin of it, is pretty cool. We're going to blast through this stuff because it's on the boring side of history, in my opinion, after the Revolution. The President's March, 1789, is going to be composed for the inauguration of George Washington. It's going to be a very important song in the days ahead. And then in 1798, the U.S. Marine Corps will get their first musicians, all right? This is the President's own, we know them today, 32 fifers and drummers. This is during the Adams administration. And their first real big gig is going to be the inauguration of Thomas Jefferson in 1800. And a special musical song, Jefferson and Liberty, is written for the inauguration of Thomas Jefferson. And that is a song that we quite frequently play out here at Fort Meigs, if you know the tune. So I'm going to play just the first string for you guys. Right? Jefferson and Liberty. If you've ever seen the Civil War movie Glory about the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, the film composer for that movie, James Horner, used Jefferson and Liberty extensively throughout the score of that movie, as well as the adjutant's call from the field music for whatever region. Artillery is going to get a band in 1803, and landmark year 1809, we have the first music school set up for the Army. This is going to be at Fort Columbus there in New York. So we have a formal school for training the field music, the fifers and drummers, okay? In 1812, a Western school, a sister school for Army field music will be established in Kentucky. But then also in 1812, Charles Ashworth is going to publish his method book for Army music on drums and fife. And the reason that I mentioned that is because that is sort of the landmark document for us that interpret the War of 1812, because we look to that to understand what music was being played, when, how it was used, and all kinds of other things. It is absolutely invaluable as a tool for us musicians. The War of 1812. Finally, we get here. Hail Columbia. We talked about the President's March being written for George Washington's inauguration. About a decade after it's written, it's going to get a set of lyrics. And the principal lyrics in that song are the words Hail Columbia. So it goes by both names. Some people call it Hail Columbia, others the President's March. But like Yankee Doodle, it's going to be lofted to the status of sort of an unofficial national song. All right. And we still play it out here today quite frequently at Fort Meigs. The focus for the War of 1812 is going to be on field music. We have very little information left to us about regimental bands during this time, and how they were used, where they were used, who had them. But it is the height of pomp and formality in military music, is the War of 1812. If you think of marching bands today, the uniforms that they wear, they are very reminiscent of 1812 uniforms. The reason that marching bands today use that is because they are paying homage to that, the high point of military music. They're emulating that. And another example of how music is reaching its height in formality here is reveille, okay? We might think of reveille today as this quick little bugle rip that comes out, lasts about 25 seconds, 40 seconds maybe. But in 1812, reveille is a full 7 double pieces of music played end to end, okay? So rather than 25 seconds, it might be closer to 25 minutes to play reveille all the way through. That's how grandiose things are. But if you're a fan of the snooze button today, I think it's pretty cool that reveille lasts that long, because you're like, oh, okay, they're only on the Scotch March. I got like 6 more minutes to play here, right? Reverse colors are in use. The musicians' coats will be red. The Janissary craze continues, that Turkish music thing, and that is apparent here at Fort Meigs even. Way out here in the mud, we do have a bass drum and we have timbrels, like a tambourine in our band out here at Fort Meigs. So this bizarre Turkish fad is even hitting us way out here. New songs are going to be written during the war, of course, celebrating the Navy. This is what America has taken so much pride in, is the ship-to-ship victories that the U.S. Navy has seen, as opposed to some reverses on land. So a lot of the new songs are going to be written about the Navy. My particular favorite is Yankee Thunder. I would love to teach that to the regiment out here and get us all to sing it regularly as a sense of pride for us. And a big time song at this time, The Girl I Left Behind Me. All right, so as units would muster in their various towns and then march off to the war, the field music, or if they had a regimental band, of course, is going to be playing The Girl I Left Behind Me. So soldiers in the field are going to recognize that tune. You're going to hear it a lot. And interestingly enough, in 1917, the most popular song, The Girl I Left Behind Me. All right, so even in World War I, the sentiments are the same. All right, and music is going to be used even though it's 100 years hence. We can't not mention the Star-Spangled Banner. It's one of the great things that we get from the War of 1812. Francis Scott Key is going to write the lyrics to that aboard the HMS Minden as he's observing, of course, the bombardment of Fort McHenry. That moment that he is describing, if you do a little research into this Francis Scott Key, you know, he's on board the Minden, and the Minden is kind of this this smaller ship that was kind of used as like a ferry boat, basically, in the British fleet, taking messages back and forth, taking different people to different ships and to shore and things like that. It is observing the bombardment through the night, not knowing what's going on, and suddenly the British guns fall silent, and he doesn't know whether or not they have fallen silent because the Americans have surrendered, or if the British have given up the attack. But it's the moment that he sees the soldiers actually rowing back, the British invasion foot soldiers rowing back to the fleet, that he discovers that the Americans have held out. The attack has been called off. He won't see the flag flying over the fort for another hour, hour and a half or so. But he's still writing the words, so I'm sure it was an awe-inspiring sight, right? It will be another unofficial national song for us, along with Yankee Doodle and the President's March, until the 20th century, of course, when we officially adopted it as our national anthem. It does have a unifying effect on the citizenry, all right? The poem does spread kind of like wildfire, and the young generation that emerges from the war is going to be thinking of the United States as a single nation, whereas the older generation still remembers the days of the 13 colonies. But that song is going to have a unifying character. It's a very unusual song in that it has such a huge vocal range. All right, when you think about the national anthem sung today, it is sung by an individual in front of a microphone, right? We do not sing it in chorus because it's very difficult. It has a huge range, all right? Songs that are meant to be sung by a group of people together, like hymns, have a very short range, maybe 6 different notes. But Star-Spangled Banner is a full octave and a half. So you need some pipes to be able to get this one out. I was gonna take a break to see how we're doing in the audience, because we haven't gotten any feedback from them if they can hear okay, if they can interact with the chat group and anything like that. So now's a good time to check to see just how we're doing. I know we're getting on in time, but like I said, I was going to be at it for a while. So if anyone has any quick questions, you can add it in the chat, although I don't really see any hands raised out there. So no one has really left us any messages, I believe, right? I just want to make sure that you guys can see and can hear me, and that you just haven't been looking at empty slides and reading all night. Let us know you're alive. Yes, please let us know you're alive. Does anyone have any questions in the studio audience here on anything we talked about? The American Revolution, War of 1812, field music, regimental bands, recruitment, Scottish regiments, French and Indian War.
Question.
Yes.
So you had mentioned that they practiced, there was a set practice time between 11 and 1 p.m.
Right.
So what occurred should the British or whoever attack during the 11 to 1 p.m.?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are musicians at headquarters at all times throughout the night and throughout the day. So they're gonna not be present at rehearsal. And rehearsal is probably going to be for the guys that are still learning the trade. You know, if you're a full-fledged duty drummer fit for duty, you know, unless you have new music to learn, you're doing pretty good. But it's always, you don't play all the commands all the time, so it's good to keep that kind of stuff sharp and rehearsed. But like I said, we're rotating through musicians all the time. All right.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Talking about the Star-Spangled Banner, I had heard that it was set to the British drinking song, Arcadium in Heaven. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate. Whether or not Francis Scott Key heard British soldiers drunkenly singing this as he's dreamily looking at the horizon is not known.
Right.
Okay, that's how the story goes. But you always need something to help inspire you in terms of the verse and meter if you're writing, and that's what he chose. And there are a lot of different versions of that song. We're going to find out a little bit later that there's going to be quite a committee to decide what exactly the Star-Spangled Banner is, what that song is musically.
I think I read somewhere where it was our national, it was really by mistake our national anthem. It was at a sport event where we didn't have one yet, a national anthem. And when you win at the Olympics, they play your national anthem, and they decided to play that. That's how.
Oh, well, yeah, that could certainly be. Before I hadn't heard that, but before it's officially established, we needed something to represent us. Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's in the 1930s that.
Yeah, I think it was during, was it Owens?
But that's when we established it as our official national song. It's 36, I think. All right, if there are no online questions, we'll move forward and we'll blast through the rest of this talk. Post-war nationalism. After the War of 1812, it's kind of weird. We're used to the army shrinking when we are not at war. But it's the musicians that are actually going to be expanding in the peacetime periods of American history here. So in 1816, West Point is going to get its own band, and big band too, 18 players. And then you can see the advancement, 10-person band, 12, 16, and on it goes. During this time, we're starting to develop more of a community band atmosphere to American culture. All right, we've got a lot of German immigration that's happening. They're bringing their horns, they're bringing their community band tradition, and that's starting to take hold in the United States. So we've got a lot of music going on in communities, and we have the rise of brass, and this is really, really important. Okay, before when we were looking at the regimental bands, clarinets and flutes and oboes and stuff like that. Brass is at a disadvantage because all brass instruments before this are kind of like bugles. There's only a certain number of notes that they can play based on the overtone series, the length of physical tube that horn has. It's going to dictate what notes you can play. But in like the 1830s, we start getting technological advancements to brass instruments. You will start getting valves on them, and you can start changing the pitch for notes outside of the overtone series. And that's going to be really, really huge because brass is going to explode, and it's going to be very important for the American Civil War, which is just on the horizon at this time. So brass is on the up and up. In 1854, the Signal Corps is established. This is the semaphore signs on the battlefield using flags and things like that. And that is going to be kind of the first indication that field music is facing its death, will be the Signal Corps established. On to the American Civil War. You can see the image here on the left. That soldier, what is he holding? He's holding a brass instrument because that is going to be the rage during the American Civil War. And all the bands, you see a lot of photographs of the Civil War and a lot of photographs of musicians in the Civil War. Almost all of them with just big brass bands. So that is an accurate photograph. A lot of people claim that the Civil War is the most musical war in history. And that could be very true. But we literally have tens of thousands of musicians in the Army on both sides during this conflict. So a lot of musicians. Entire bands, town bands, are going to sign up together. All right, you think about the recruitment craze, the volunteer fever that gripped America when the Civil War begins. And entire towns are going to sign up and form an entire company or an entire regiment, right? All the boys from the town are going to sign up. Well, all the musicians are going to go too. Okay, so you have a complete intact band for that regiment already as soon as they muster in. That means you don't have to train anybody. They already know all their songs. Perfect system, all right? So there will be so many musicians. And unofficial bands are going to creep back in, all right? Remember, we talked about Washington getting rid of this policy in the Revolution. Well, officers are going to start having bands. There's going to be so many musicians. These unofficial bands are going to creep back up. They will be supported by the officers. And sheet music publication will explode during the Civil War. Okay, we have a lot of publishing houses all over the place. Cincinnati is a huge center for music production during this time. And they're just pumping out new music for bands to play in the field and new music for people to play at home on the old parlor piano and sing. So music, again, there's no recordings at this time. So public performance of music is going to be extremely important. You can see that in the explosion of music publication during the Civil War. That's it. The division of musicians is going to be very similar to what we've already encountered: field music and the regimental bands. The field music doing a lot of the same stuff, duty calls in camp and signals on the battlefield, keeping track of the Army's day and what is happening on the battlefield for the officers in this long distance communication service, all right? But there is no training. You have to remember that most of the troops during the Civil War are part of the volunteer army. The only musicians who are getting formal training are those at that school we talked about at Fort Columbus. But that is for the regular army, which is still kind of small. They are fighting alongside the volunteer army. Those field musicians are well trained and totally pro, top notch. But the volunteer army is going to have no central training. So you're going to have to learn your job. You're going to learn your duty on the job, basically, from the drum major. The drum major's job is to teach people who don't know how to play, how to play. Okay. So no central training for the field music. The regimental bands, they're doing a lot of the same things, although they're just a lot bigger. All right, ceremonies, army reviews, big, grand spectacles to increase morale. Concerts, guard mounts, yes, drills to get the musicians or to get the soldiers to work together. Dress parades, formal ceremonies, things like that. You can see the size of the Army band is getting bigger, all right? Average Union Army bands between 16 and 24 players. So that's a big, big sound. Confederate armies are going to have smaller bands, the average between 8 and 15 musicians, although the Confederate government authorizes bands to be as big as 16 privates. They never really are able to field that many musicians. I want you to pay particular attention, though, to the photograph that's kind of in the background. I know it might not be that easy to see because it's designed to be a background photograph. But if you look through that, that is the Army field music for the 30th Pennsylvania Regiment in the field. You can see a lot of drummers there. There's a couple fifers on the wings, but a couple things I notice about this photograph. One is they're wearing their drum slings on a neck sling instead of the shoulder baldric. That is, again, a Scottish thing. That's why the Highland regiments did it. So here's this another connection between Scotland and American Army music. And the other thing you notice about this picture, they are all grown men, okay? There are no boys in this picture. And that's going to be really important for our last subject, which we are approaching. Other duties for musicians, and this goes for all of history, not just the Civil War, but from its inception all the way through modern times. Medical assistance, okay? In combat, the regimental band is almost automatically going to be reassigned to the Army surgeon, okay? And honestly, probably most of the field music too. In a combat situation, the flank companies of a regiment will retain their musicians, and the drum major will stay with the regiment, but a lot of the interior line companies may have their field music reassigned to the surgeon, depending on how tight things are in terms of casualties. So they're going to be working as stretcher bearers, delivering water to troops for water call if needed, message takers. We already talked about recruitment a little bit, and punishment. Musicians are used to punish soldiers, all right? This might not be the flogging that you encounter in the British Army, because that was a drummer's duty in the British Army. But to punish soldiers, you might parade around with the guilty party to call attention to them, playing music as they are covered in tars and feathers, or wearing a big sign saying what their infraction was, or riding a wooden horse or a fence rail or something like that, or drumming them out of camp, right? You want to call attention to the fact that this person is a wrongdoer, and use the musicians to do that. So they're very much engaged in punishment. And going back to the first thing, medical assistance, I got to know really well a member of the modern U.S. Army Band when she gave a talk here about a year ago, Master Sergeant Leah Foss, and she said, interesting, this connection with musicians being assigned to the Army surgeon. What are musicians in the Army doing today? Well, when COVID hit, they were taking people's temperatures, okay? They were administering COVID tests to people, both in the Army and the civilian population. Now, they're probably giving injections to people. So still today, the musicians are being used to assist the medical corps. That hasn't changed in the U.S. Army. Musicians being used in battle is extremely rare, but there are a couple of cool examples of that. If you want to know about the specific battles and listed, I won't tell the stories of all of them. You can ask a question or shoot me an email tomorrow. Concord Bridge, we already talked about, and the White Cockade. Bennington and Brandywine, both in the American Revolution, have a neat musical story to them of musicians playing on the field. The Battle of Franklin in the American Civil War is my favorite because the Confederate soldiers will have their regimental bands playing in the assault on the federal lines outside of Franklin there. Sheridan and Custer, part of the Civil War, they were well known for using musicians in battle. That kind of represents their character. They were flamboyant individuals, very dashing, swashbuckling people. Why not have our band, my band, because they were unofficial, playing as we ride into battle? That's just their style. We haven't talked at all about the bugle, and people always ask me about the bugle. The bugle is used, of course, you can see it called for in recruiting posters going all the way back to 1775, but it is largely used by mounted troops as their field music, okay? Why is that? Because it's darn hard to play a fife on the back of a horse, okay? I wouldn't even want to try, but a bugle is kind of a one-handed instrument. You can put it to your lips with one hand and still control the animal with the other. So it's very effective for mounted troops. Although it can be used for troops on the ground, for foot soldiers as well, particularly for light infantry. You get a lot of bugles, rifle regiments as well, okay? But after the Civil War, changing tactics, the Army is going to be using the bugle more and more and more, all right? You think about changing tactics. What goes away after the Civil War? The musket really is starting to go away. Okay, and if you don't have big blocks of troops delivering fire in linear tactics, you don't need the field music as much. All right, to drill those troops, to train them, and to send signals to other companies. Okay, the American Army after Civil War is increasingly mounted. All right, we're fighting out west with huge tracts of land. Mounted troops, they need the bugle, so the bugle will be adopted as the official instrument. But as you can see, the fife was still permitted as a substitute for the bugle all the way until the First World War. The tapsmith we'll talk about here. Moving on. John P. Sousa. We can't talk about Army music without mentioning Sousa at least a little bit. He is the drum major for the President's Own. Yeah, you've heard the name before. Absolutely. This is what the guy actually looks like. Rather cool looking, I have to say. He would not be out of place in 2022, walking around at all. Sousa is very much responsible for the sound of America, the American sound. All right, he's got 130 marches that he composes, and That band is going to tour all over the place, playing concert. And for the first time, we have recorded music. Columbia Records is going to put out 60 different recordings of Sousa's band. Okay, so now this American sound is coming into homes for the first time. They're being acquainted with the sound of the military band, and it is a very American sound. Other nations are going to look at Sousa music as that American sound until jazz is really established. Okay, Sousa is on the committee that officially adopts the official version of the Star-Spangled Banner. All right, there has to be a group of people that get together and decide exactly how the song is going to go. Okay, we all know how it goes, but you have to think. Okay, clarinet 3, is that a half note or is that a dotted quarter note with an eighth rest? Is this phrase slurred or is this tongue? All of this has to be decided. And Sousa was part of the 4-man committee that made the official version of the Star-Spangled Banner that the government owns now, and it's the true version of the song. Moving on. First World War, all branches are going to have strong musical components. You can see the size of the band, 48 people. That's a huge band. Okay, 7,000 musicians on the ground for World War I. Navy's going to have smaller bands, obvious reason. Ships are a little bit littler. You got to fit all these guys on deck. Going to have little bands. Okay. Again, but musicians have other duties. They're trying to keep the musicians away from the fighting. Someone has to dig the trenches, though. Those are going to be what the Army band is doing. They're going to be digging the trenches for World War I. Ambulance drivers, stretcher bearers, that hasn't changed. What has changed is the location of where we're fighting. We are now in Europe. We're going to play European music, okay? So they're playing a lot of music by Handel, marches by Chopin, things like that, okay? So they're reflecting where they are in the music that they are playing. Closer, My God, to Thee is going to be a big song for the Army bands now, all right? We talked about Yankee Doodle and some of the other ones. Closer to my God, to Thee, moving into hymn music, very sort of religious, very solemn. This is what the troops are hearing. After the First World War, though, the musicians returning home are going to have an enormous impact on American culture that we still have today. Okay, got 7,500 band people coming home. Well, we've got to give them jobs. What are they going to do? They're going to be band directors. Okay, we're going to set them up in schools, and music education is going to become a real big thing. All right, so every school is going to have a music education department. Every school is going to have a band. This kid's going to get a trumpet and teach them how to play it. Who's going to do that? All these guys coming home are going to need jobs. Okay, and so the band director is born at this time. All right, and this is going to spark the rise again in community bands. All these musicians that played together during the war, they're going to want to keep playing together when they get home. Okay, and that community band is going to start being recognized as having a lot of incredible outdoor utilitarian uses. All right, we're going to have a parade down Main Street. Let's get the band to play. We're going to have a football game. Let's have the band play, and that is still with us today. Okay, so we still have that very American, that very outdoor sound of the band. And it's playing every Friday night at high school football games. Okay. Second World War. I'm trying to move a little bit quickly here. Field music is officially abolished. All right, so this is a sad thing for guys like me who love studying this stuff. We will not be using drums to communicate ideas anymore, okay? Technology has changed, the tactics have changed, all right? We have radios to talk to people now, all right? The bands are gonna change. We're focusing now on dance music, okay? The swing era is in full effect. All right, let's entertain the troops. Let's give them a dance. Let's get some girls in here. Let's have a good time. So the troops are gonna be entertained by these bands, yes, but for swing dances, all right? And the U.S. Army Band has a very long tour of duty. They are in Europe for a full 2 years playing. In Britain in 43, but once 44 comes around, they're on mainland Europe with the soldiers. Again, entertaining, okay? And music can be an enormous propaganda tool. This is another thing that we might not think about, okay? Get celebrities like Glenn Miller, join the Air Force Band, big deal, okay? Then people are thinking about signing up for the Army, signing up for the Air Force too, okay? Talking about propaganda, you think about what happened in Japan after the Second World War, okay? You want to affect a culture, bring them closer to you, affect their youth, and get their youth to love your culture. And you see so many Japanese people growing up with, young Japanese people going to dances and the doo-wop music of the late 40s, early rock and roll in the 50s, and they love this music, they love that kind of dancing. That is a rudimentary thing to affect your culture. That's going to bring them closer, perhaps more obedient in some ways, right? You get their youth to listen. Okay, you think about Japanese culture today, pop music that's there, and it's incredible, right? J-pop, it's like audible sugar, all right? And it all starts from these propaganda troops. I gave this talk a few months ago in October, and in the audience, there was this very, very old woman. And after the show, she came up to me and she thanked me for giving the talk. She spoke to me in a very heavy German accent, okay? And she wanted to tell me, growing up in Germany, when the war was over, they went back to school. They had to learn how to sing Yankee Doodle in German schools. They had to learn how to sing it in German, and they had to learn how to sing it in English. And I was like, wow, I never knew that, but that is an example of music being used as propaganda in a post-war situation to affect the citizenry. I never knew that, and I was stunned. I asked her if she could sing it to me in German, because I'd never heard it before, sung in German. And I even played a strain of it on the fife so she could remember the melody. She thought about it for a second, and then tears just started pouring down her cheeks. And it was weird. I mean, this is a woman who's probably 90 years old. It's odd to see someone that old crying, almost uncontrollable, right? And it was very moving. I don't think she was crying because it was a painful memory for her. I think she was crying because she was met with her systems failing her, right? She could not reach back into her youth and recall that memory. And it was frustrating to her. And that frustration is what the tears were about. Recognizing her own limitations in age. But it was moving for me to witness that in a way. Last slide here, the modern era. Again, musicians are away from the fighting in the front lines. The troops are being moved back at times to receive entertainment from USO tours and bands playing. So that is the musician contribution to troops in Vietnam, getting them some time away from the front lines, away from the jungles, and hear some music from back home. Again, this American sound that's going to bring them. And today, the U.S. Army, Pershing's own, the U.S. Army Band, is huge. 7 full ensembles work for that band now. And you can see a couple of surprises in there. There's a string orchestra that's part of the American Army now. And the herald trumpets, that is exactly what you think about, like the long trumpets with the hanging sort of tapestry and the heraldry on them. We have that for the Army. They do important work for ceremonies. Army Blues, so we still have a small jazz combo that plays for the Army, and Voices in Downrange is sort of like a Harmony Road show musical stage pop kind of thing. It's very interesting. All right, last thing we're going to talk about, and I've gone slightly longer than I'm used to giving this talk. But I want to explore a little bit of the myths that are common about musicians. And perhaps this is the most important point. We saved it for last. I can't tell you how many living history events I've been to, and people come up to me and they say, "Excuse me, aren't you a little old to be doing what you're doing?" Mm-hmm. And I look around and I'm like, "What? Reenacting? I'm like the youngest guy here. What are you talking about?" They're like, "No, playing the drums. Weren't they all boys?" And no, they weren't. And it's an opportunity for me to educate other people. And sometimes, you know, they like the information, sometimes they don't. The truth is that Army musicians are overwhelmingly adult men that are playing music, okay? I'm not saying, and I repeat this, I am not saying for people at home listening, that drummer boys did not exist. They did. But Overwhelmingly so, musicians are adult men. I think what has happened here is that anytime you have something that is exceptional, and a 14-year-old kid in the Army is exceptional, and something is exceptional, it sticks in the mind. All right, and if that sticks in the mind and it rolls through 200 years of history and it gets feathered down, then suddenly people's imagination is that musicians were boys. All right, that is where myths come from, the exceptionalness of it. Now, it is true that if you were a non-combatant, you could come into the Army at a younger age. And we have examples of, yes, boys 13, 14, 15 years old signing up and being drummer boys. That did happen. But you have to understand that this is a time when, if you were going to learn a trade, you did it through a relationship of a master and an apprentice. Okay, if you were going to be a sail maker or a rope maker, you came in at a young age and you did the craft jobs in the shop, and you slowly learned how to make a sail over time by working with the master. And then eventually you learn to do all the jobs, you can go out and be your own master. That is somewhat similar to the relationship between the drummer boy and the drum major. Okay, you are learning the trade. And it was believed that it would take 5 or 6 years for you to learn everything that you would need to know to be a duty drummer. So if you sign up at 15 and you are a learner for 6 years, you are 21 when you go on duty with the rest of the troops. That means that you're the same age with the men serving around you. And that similar age is going to add to the esprit de corps, the sense of unity that band of men has, okay? Duty drummers versus learners, that's how musicians were categorized. You were either fit for duty, which means you can perform all the duties of a drummer and you were on duty, or you were considered a learner. They do not use the term not fit for duty. That has a different connotation, but you could be a learner, which means you're still in the Army, you're still drawing rations, but you are not on duty, you are learning the trade. And that is what the overwhelming number of boy musicians were doing. They were being learners in the Army, and that's how you appear on the muster roll. Another reason why you can't be a young boy is the size requirement, okay? In the British Army, there is a minimum of 5'5" to be in the Army, whether you're an 11-year-old fifer or you're a 40-year-old sergeant. You have to be above 5'5". So if you're a boy that's 4'11", you are not serving in the British Army, okay? But that's the British Army. The American Army, think about this drum, okay? Look at the depth that this drum has. I'm 5'9", and when I carry this, it is about 5 to 6 inches off the ground, all right? And if I was 5'4" or 5'1" or something short, this would be on the ground. It would be useless. You couldn't even play it, all right? So there's a size requirement. It's another reason why musicians are not boys. Average ages of soldiers, of musicians in the American Revolution. For drummers, the average age was 20. Okay? The average age of a fifer in the American Revolution, 19. These are young guys, but they're still adults. These are not boys. And the idea that the drummer boys were like mascots to the regiment, that is also really not true, okay? It is the drum, it is the physical instrument that has the symbology for the regiment, okay? It's like the regimental colors. You never want to get your drums captured by the enemy, all right? Because it's an insult that you failed in your duty, all right? And you think about Army camps, the drums are stacked with the colors, okay? They are together, so they have that unity. So it's the physical instrument that is like the mascot for the regiment, not the boy drummer, okay? The last thing that we will talk about is the myth of taps. The reason that I wanted to talk about this is because taps is probably the most recognized military song in this nation. Everybody knows it, and it is played somewhere, probably a dozen times, somewhere in the United States every day. All right, taps. And there are all these stories about the origin of taps and where it comes from. And the most colorful say that this is, this is a Civil War song. And there was this dad who was looking for his son who was engaged in the Confederate Army. And he's looking over the dead on the battlefield, trying to find his son, desperately looking for him. And he finds his corpse, fresh dead. And he rolls his body over. And in his breast pocket of his jacket is some sheet music, and he pulls it out, and there is the music for taps that his son wrote. The last thing he did in life was to scroll out this remarkable melody, and it was so moving, and he played it for his son's death, and it caught on in the army. This is all hogwash, but people love to talk about this, that this is the origin of taps. It has a much lamer origin story, okay? Utterly lame. General Butterfield, General Daniel Butterfield, was brigade commander in the 5th Corps of the Army of the Potomac, all right? And he did not like the bugle tune, Extinguished Lights, all right? We think of tattoo, all right, the end of the day. He did not like the call. He thought it was not appropriate for what it did, all right? Interestingly enough, Extinguished Lights was Napoleon's favorite military call, all right? And we know all the generals in the Civil War really emulated Napoleon. Butterfield hated this song. And so he worked with his bugler, a man named Oliver Norton, to try to come up with something new that was more appropriate. And this was not like an instant thing. We worked on it together over a period of time. So finally they came to the melody, and Norton started playing it. And it was slowly adopted through the Army as a more appropriate song for Extinguished Lights. All right, so this is all happening in Virginia after the Peninsula Campaign. All right, so hate to close the door on all the romanticism of military music, but taps is that. Thank you guys. I got done by 9 o'clock, so that was really my goal.